Hello, everyone. Well, this is something that I had come across years and years ago, probably over a decade at this point, or about a decade. It's been a really long time. And I'm just going to lay this out briefly. And as I present this video, there's going to be some holes and blind spots, so to speak, in my investigation of this. But my hope is to just lay out the background of this and some breadcrumb trails so that when things start happening in the near future, they won't really come as a surprise to you, and you'll understand why. So, just to give some background, so this is a 3D rendering of well, a CG image of the city of David, which is a subset of the greater city of Jerusalem. So the Temple Mount is this area, and I do put that in quotation marks. Temple Mount is this area to the north of the city of David. Then you have the Gihon Springs over on the east side of the city of David. And then you have this interesting area where the palace supposedly was, roughly in the center, north to south of this city of David area. So the city of David was the city of David. And then what happens with these cities? So Jerusalem is an extremely complicated city. It has grown organically over the millennia, really, and expanded. And what has happened is you have just layers and layers from the different historical eras, and there are these tunnel systems underneath the city. There's layers and layers of ruins. There's excavation sites mixed into the city. There are these wall extensions. So here is kind of the extent of the greater city of Jerusalem. There's these different periods where there was extensions added on, but this, well, let me see here. The city of David was kind of this section down here, and then the Temple Mount, where there is a Muslim mosque today, and it's a pretty large rectangular area, is to the north of that. And so there's been a lot of stuff circulated for decades that in order for the third temple to be rebuilt, this mosque would have to be destroyed. And there's a whole interesting history of this going back to these wars and conflicts that with Arab nations before the formation of the modern Israeli state, and how when Jerusalem was eventually taken back by the Jewish forces from Arab forces, there's this one tank commander. I forget his name. He was a general. His first name, I believe, was Moshe, which I think is the equivalent of Moses, basically. But he took back much of, or at least some of Jerusalem, but for whatever reason he didn't. He felt like he hit a point where it was enough, and he felt like God was telling him he didn't need to go all the way and reclaim the Temple Mount. And so he left that in the hands of the Arabs, and I think it was the what I forget who they were fighting at that particular time, but he was heavily criticized in the aftermath of that. Why did you leave the Temple Mount in the hands of these of our enemies, non-Jewish people? And but I've seen some people who have done an examination of things, and I don't know so much about well, let me think about this a little bit. Anyway, um, there are some people who have looked into this in detail and come to the conclusion that the temple site was actually in the city of David somewhere. It was never the Temple Mount. The entire Temple Mount area, they argue, is the Roman fortress Antonia, and the rectangular dimensions, so Roman encampments were typically laid out in rectangles, and we have excavations of them all over the world, well, all over the Roman world, ancient Roman world. And so the dimensions of the Temple Mount, the rectangular portion of it, they match very well these other known Roman encampments. And not only that, the engineering seems to be something kind of typical of the Romans. They were known for these engineering projects, and like some of these walls around the Temple Mount area are just very well constructed, just astounding to see, really. But if you look at some of these maps of Jerusalem at the time of Christ, I'll see if I can find one here. Let me just do a search real quick. Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. So if you pull stuff up in your Bible, you're going to see a map that looks like this. This is a good one here. And it will show the Temple Mount and the Temple Complex as being, here. City of David's down here to the south of it. And they'll show Antonia Fortress as being this little add-on alongside the Temple Complex. Whereas some of these alternative scholars are saying that no, in actuality, this entire thing was the Antonia Fortress, because it would have needed to house 6,000 to 10,000 Romans. See, the Romans, whenever they traveled, often these soldiers, if they're going to be stationed in a province for a very long time, they would bring their families, and they would there would be all these craftsmen and service providers and prostitutes, merchants, and infrastructure and support, logistics that would follow the legion around. So, we're talking 6,000 to 10,000 people. And historically, the consensus view is they were all kind of crammed into this Roman fortress here. And then the Temple Mount is this, the Temple Complex, I should say, is this larger area. But alternative scholarship, the alternative view is that this entire area was actually the Roman fortress Antonia, which dimensionally makes a whole lot more sense considering how many people the fortress Antonia, the Roman fortress, would have needed to accommodate. And then according to this view, the temple site was in the city of David somewhere and connected to the Roman fortress Antonia by a causeway or a stairway. And so in this alternative view, that Temple Mount area is actually just remains the Roman fortress Antonia, and the mosque there is not the site of the actual original temple. The original temple site, therefore, would be further south, somewhere within the boundaries of the city of David. And back when I was looking into these things, I had encountered a photograph, and it's just stuck in my mind. I can still see it today. It was a photograph purporting to be the foundations of that original temple site that had been located within the boundaries of the city of David. And this picture was basically it was just bedrock. Bedrock with blood channels carved into it and areas carved into it for animal pens, and where there would have been hitching posts and hitching rings actually fastened into the rock. But it was just that bedrock, nothing else. And that actually fits with what Jesus said in the New Testament, which when he prophesied over the temple, he said not one stone is going to be left on top of another. So my question, I guess, would be, if Jesus said not one stone is going to be left on top of another, now obviously the Jewish people don't consider that to be authoritative, but we Christians do, then what is the Wailing Wall? Because the Wailing Wall is clearly an intact partial structure of whatever was there at the Temple Mount. So what do we make of that? Well, we as Christians, if we're holding to this alternative view that the original temple site was within the city of David somewhere and not the Temple Mount, the modern Temple Mount, then this fits very well that yes, the temple was torn down all the way down to the bedrock and that there's nothing left, and Jesus' words are completely true. And therefore the Wailing Wall that these Jewish people are going to and praying at and pushing their prayers in the cracks and so forth, a very superstitious thing, that's the vestiges of the Roman fortress Antonia. And what a vivid image of the spiritual bondage that the Jewish people are in today. They're going to the Roman fortress, a remnant of this pagan power that conquered them and subjugated them, and they're praying at this wall thinking that it's a remnant of the temple when it really isn't. So you can kind of see this is a pretty interesting subject. Very, very fascinating, compelling stuff if you're into Bible prophecy and ancient history. And if the Temple Mount is not actually where the temple was. If that area, that entire area, was always the Roman fortress Antonia, then that means that if the Jews have secured the area that was the original temple, they could rebuild a third temple on the site of the original temple, and they could do it without having to interfere with that modern Temple Mount site at all. You can see how that would facilitate the construction of the third temple and really take a lot of the geopolitical difficulties right out of the situation. And I say that in light of these recent stories that are popping up about things like, I mentioned this in another video, the rehearsal of an ancient red heifer sacrifice that took place at the beginning of the month of July. So we got to ask the question, well, if the temple, well, let's first go to the scriptures, because there's an account in Acts that talks about this a little bit. So we're going to read some stuff from the book of Acts, and then when my voice starts to give out, we'll come back and we'll take a look at Google Maps, Google Street View, and some other stuff, and just kind of see what we can see. See if we can get some ideas about some of the things that might be happening next. Oh, by the way, and there is some rationality for this idea that the temple, the original temple site, would have been within the city of David. So this is the Gihon Spring. This is the water source for this area. And there really wasn't an actual water source up close on the Temple Mount site. This Gihon Spring is down here, east of the city of David. And so this place that is, we are told, was the citadel or palace of David. What if that was actually the original temple complex? It actually puts the original temple complex much closer to the Gihon Spring. And that's very useful because the spring would have been needed for the purification of the priests. We just can't fathom how bloody the sacrifice system was. Millions of animals being slaughtered, rivers of blood, and like I said, I saw that excavation site where there were blood channels cut in the foundation stone. And I don't remember where I saw those photos. I wasn't able to find them again, but basically, as I said, it was just the bedrock, blood channels, animal pens, spots cut for posts for hitching animals to, and stuff like that. And then that entire site was under some kind of awning or canopy. And I don't remember off the top of my head whether it was like a metal framework type awning with like tarps over top of it, or if it was a metal type framework with like metal siding over it to roof it and to wall it off. But that entire site, the photo that I was seeing was inside the building, so to speak, but it was really kind of a temporary building that was just shielding it from the sun, from visibility outside and stuff like that. But it was kind of like a very rustic, temporary structure around the foundation area, presumably so that researchers could continue to work and do archaeological stuff on the site there, and have it covered and not subject to erosion and stuff like that, or tampering and the prying eyes of tourists and such. Alright, so let's go ahead and read from Acts and see what we can see. So this is from Acts chapter 21. And we're going to go ahead and start on verse 27. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, so this is in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place. And further brought the Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place. So this is, remember, Paul is kind of the apostle to the Gentiles, and he was teaching that. And this coincided with what Peter was shown in a vision, that Gentiles were no longer unclean, that God had torn down that wall of separation, and we Gentiles could have salvation through Jesus Christ. A very good thing for us Gentiles who are not of Hebrew origins. And so that's what these people are complaining about. That the doctrines that the Christian church and the Christian apostles were preaching and teaching in Jerusalem and throughout Judea. For they had seen before with him in the city of Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And so that was a big no-no. The Christians were teaching I'm assuming by this point in time, just because of the context, that the Christians were teaching that yes, Gentiles can be born again as well. And then there's this rumor that Paul had brought an Ephesian into the temple. That's a big no-no. And so they're all up in arms about this. And all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. So the captain of the guard, so to speak, hears about it. And there's basically rioting in the streets over these people who are have put together a lynch mob, and they're going to kill Paul. So he immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. Ran down from where? Well, the highest land in Jerusalem is that Temple Mount area. And so we're going to see that it seems like there was a stairway or a causeway going from the Temple Mount area, which was actually not the Temple Mount. That's the fortress Antonia, where the Roman garrison, where these soldiers and centurions would have been. And they run down this stairway from that fortress, which was connected to the temple complex down in the city of David. Then the chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and what he had done. And some cried one thing, some another, among the multitude. And when he could not know the certainty for the tumult, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. So that's the fortress Antonia that's being referred to there. And when he came upon the stairs, so they're going from a lower area into a higher area, and the higher area is the castle. Now understand this, that the highest land in Jerusalem is this Temple Mount area. So you kind of see the logical connection here. And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was born of the soldiers for the violence of the people. So Paul's a Roman citizen, and then the Romans are also charged with keeping order in the city of Jerusalem, a very difficult thing because there have been many Jewish uprisings and rebellions against the Romans. And I don't know at this point that the Romans necessarily know that Paul is a Roman citizen, which he is, even though he's a Jew. But they do know that the people have put together a lynch mob, and they're trying to kill Paul. And so the soldiers are protecting him from the Jewish mob that wants to kill him. That he was born of the soldiers for the violence of the people, for the multitude of the people followed after, crying, Away with him. And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days madest an uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? So basically, he, in a case of misidentification, the captain, it seems to be under the impression that maybe Paul is this rebel leader who's an Egyptian who made an uproar and led this rebel faction out into the wilderness, and presumably there was some bad outcome that resulted from that. Probably violence, probably the Romans were called up to Roman legions or Roman mercenaries, because there were thousands of mercenaries that were in this area that were not necessarily Romans, but they were paid by the Romans to maintain order. Probably there was a violence, and that rebellion had to be put down with force, would be my guess, but I don't know specifically the details of that. Probably Josephus has talked about this in his works. But anyway, Paul says, I'm a man which am a man of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. And when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs. So the stairs are above this area that they just came out of, which is where the temple is, which is a lower area, and the stairs lead up to the castle. So you kind of see where this is going. Temple Mount's the highest area in Jerusalem. This actually fits with the alternative view that somewhere down here in the city of David is where the original temple is. Then there's a causeway or stairway going up to the Temple Mount. And now Paul is on that stairway looking down at the mob that is trying to kill him. And he wants to speak to them, to preach to them. And when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with his hand unto the people. And when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, saying, and he basically goes on to say, Men, brethren, and fathers, because he's speaking to fellow Jews, hear my defense, which I make now unto you. And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence, and because he's speaking to them in their own language. So he's a learned man. He can speak Greek, the lingua franca of the Roman world, and he can speak Hebrew as well. And he goes on to give his background, that he studied under this reputable and well-regarded rabbi and so forth. I think we've covered the context of things. If you want to continue reading this for yourself, by all means, we're in Acts 22 now, which is where he actually is giving his address to the Hebrews. But we've given the context there, I think, pretty adequately of the layout according to the scriptures and what's going on there. The scriptures doesn't overtly say that the temple was in the city of David. It doesn't overtly say that, but there's a lot of clues that suggest that that was the case, because this was the site of the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite that David bought from him in order to sacrifice it at that spot, and so forth. Now, the Muslims believe that their mosque up here on the Temple Mount is where Abraham offered Isaac and all that other stuff, but I suggest to you that that site is actually down here in the city of David somewhere, where the original temple site was, and it's much closer to Gihon Spring. And it does not require any interference with the Temple Mount whatsoever to rebuild the third temple. Now let's dig into this a little bit and see if we can find where that temple site might have been. Because remember, I'm operating in my mind from these photographs that I saw of the foundations, which were laid bare, and then they were underneath some kind of awning. And so we'll just ask the question, like, are there areas in the city of David that dimensionally fit what we're looking for? And so we'll ask the question of, here we go, dimensions of the temple. So dimensions, according to this reference, this might be correct or not. I just kind of pulled this up real quick using Google. We'll just assume for the purposes of this video for the time being that this is correct. I haven't really double checked this against the scriptures just yet. Well, let's see. 1 Kings 6:2. Let me just pull that up in the Bible real quick and see what we've got. 1 Kings 6:2. Since we got our Bible app here. And the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 60 cubits, 60 cubits, the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. So that's actually kind of interesting dimensions if you think about it. So it's 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide. So that's a 1 to 3, or a 3 to 1 ratio, and 30 cubits high, which means that it's half again as high as it is wide. So it's taller than it is wide. So that's kind of an interesting shape of things, isn't it? Alright, so let's look at this reference and just see if they got it right. So 60 long, 20 wide, 30 high. Okay. And then they convert that. So a cubit is about 18 inches, or a foot and a half. And 90, 30, 45. Yes, looks correct to me. So 90, 30, and 45. Now, I looked up regulation soccer field. 90, 30, 45. That's feet, I believe. Yes, correct. Just making sure. So a soccer field, then, is bigger than the actual temple building would have been. So 90 by 30. Yeah, it's you could fit 2 temples within your optimal size soccer field. Now there's variations between official soccer field or pitch dimensions, but you could fit 2 temples into a soccer field basically. And the reason I say that, you might be thinking, well, who cares? The reason I say that is we actually have a soccer field here in the city of David that we can use as a point of reference, and that's this down here. And I don't know, there's probably a way that it could be checked whether this is a regulation field, like look up where this field is and so forth. That's more trouble than I want to go to right now. I do know my Hebrew letters a little bit and know how to type them in and look stuff up, but it's tedious because it doesn't use, obviously, um, the Phoenician character set, so it doesn't use the letters that we're used to using. But just taking this, so two temples can fit. Now the dimensions of this, because understand this is a crowded city, they're kind of squeezing stuff in. Um, is that this might be a smaller soccer field than regulation? We don't really know. And now that I'm looking at some of these vehicles in the parking lot, I'm thinking this soccer field might be smaller than regulation size. There was another soccer field a bit further south. Yeah, that appears to be one down there as well. But anyway, we're just using a ballpark estimate. So if we say that the temple could fit into this space here, this gives us a clue of what to look for in terms of. So we are looking for something that's more in the northern side of the city of David, because the Temple Mount is up here. So we are looking for something that's more in the northern side of the city of David, and we're looking for something that dimensionally could be the size of the temple. And we have the Gihon Spring over in this vicinity. Or at least, well, the Gihon Square, it looks like. Where exactly the head of the spring is, I don't know precisely. And what I've been doing is using this Hatira, which I don't know exactly what that is. It's got the little educational institution, yeah, based on the icon there. Maybe it's a Jewish school or something like that. There's a lot of points of interest crammed into a very small space, because this is an ancient city that has a history going back thousands of years, at least 3,000 years and beyond that. So David would have been 3,000 years ago, but the city was a Jebusite fortress prior to that. So very long history, just a lot of stuff crammed in. One thing that I noticed right away is this building here, and the reason it stands out is the roof is different from other stuff in the area. The roof looks more industrial, and it looks more like a temporary modular type of building, or some kind of synthetic material, maybe a stretched awning type of roofing. It could be. It looks like it could be a stretched, like, rubbery fabric or some kind of tarp sort of deal. So that stood out to me right away. And this other site very close by across the road, the Givati parking lot, this is an archaeological site, and you can kind of see that from here. But there's a central part of it that is covered. And what is under that? Now, this is very common with archaeological sites, with boneyards in the American West and stuff like that, to cover them up with a fabricated building, basically, so that archaeologists or paleontologists can work on the site without erosion and sun damage to the artifacts and stuff that they're uncovering. So the very center of this site is covered up, and you even have what appears to be a semi-translucent canopy over the site, and possibly spotlights for illumination inside to make sure there's plenty of light while they're working in there. That is my thought as to what's going on here, and I could be wrong about that. Hard to say with certainty. And then we also have these buildings over here, which the reason I pick these sites as being of interest is because dimensionally they seem to be more than adequate for fitting a temple building in those areas. And then remember, from our biblical account, you have the Roman Antonia fortress here, the Roman encampment. There would have been some kind of causeway or stairway coming down from there. And actually, we might be able to see some of that stuff if we poked around long enough. That might actually be this stuff here. Actually, it very much looks like that's what's going on. So we'll try to see, grab Street View and see if we can get a little more detail on that. But understand that a lot of this stuff, it's really hard to say how old some of this stuff is. I'm not an archaeologist. Some of this stuff has been built over. Obviously, the modern stuff has been built right over the ancient stuff underneath it. And even these walls and stuff, old as they are, may be older than what is underneath them. So here, this stuff that is covered up might be lower down, and it might actually be a much more ancient site than whatever this stuff is that was built on top of it. So whatever this is may be archaeologically and historically significant, whereas this not so much. But still old, obviously, but not as old or as important as whatever is under here. So I think these two sites are a very good guess, so to speak, for possibilities as to where the original temple site could have been. And understand there would have been a whole temple complex with a large courtyard around it and so forth, but the city has kind of grown up around those areas. Once the temple was razed to the bedrock, there's no reason for people not to, in the centuries following, just rebuild around it and build into the courtyard and just cover all that up. So, that's where we're at. Let's go to Street View. So what I did is I tried to get a Street View that was right in this area here, and I think you'll see, we'll compare some of the features as we go. But what I did was I used this road that kind of hooks down like this, and so our little thingy is right here in the vicinity of, is that it? That actually might be, no, that's a picture from the archaeological site, which is the one up here, the Givati parking lot. So our Street View is right about in this area here. I was trying to see, can we get more details? Can we see in more details what's going on here? And it's really interesting, actually, because the Street View puts us, you can kind of see where we are. So we've got the Hatira, that what seems to be that educational institution, and we're right here. You can see this is our road that we mentioned. We're right there where this road intersects this City of David road here. And then you can see the City of David, both in Hebrew and in English. Nice architecture here. And then you can see this appears to be the parking lot and stuff. There's the Temple Mount in the distance to the north. This is the that archaeological site, that parking lot. You actually have a parking lot for that. I don't know if this greater area was at one point a parking lot, and then they realized there was these sites of archaeological importance underneath, and then they started digging down. I couldn't find a good translation for that term Givati, and I don't know the history of this parking lot or what's going on with it. Like I said, I'm putting out a rough framework in this video with breadcrumbs. You guys can feel free to dig into this stuff in more detail if you're interested, and by all means, throw stuff down in the comments if you discover anything interesting. I'm just putting out some possibilities as to where the third temple could end up being. But let's go back to our Street View and poke around a little bit, and then I'm going to move our Street View around, and we'll see what else we can see of interest in this general vicinity. I'm curious to see if we can see remnants of the causeway that went up from the temple to the castle, as the New Testament puts it in Acts there. I'm real interested to see some of that stuff. But here, I think this is the street that goes off and hooks around. Either that is or this is. It's a little hard to tell on this, because understand we're right down here in this vicinity. Yeah. Maybe I have that wrong. Let me just double check this. No, I'm pretty sure we got that right. It's a little confusing with these overlays, and then they're not incredibly detailed. I was kind of looking at this and thinking that was a road, which it is, I believe. No, it's not on there as a road. It's just not very clearly delineated, probably because the angle of where the balloon was when they took this picture. So I guess you actually have right in here maybe, so here in this picture it looks like there's two inlets. One goes into the parking lot and then, well, no, parking lot entrance, whatever this is, and does this go down over the hill down into there? Maybe. And then this appears to be a street here as well. But I think it's all a little bit of a jumble, and some of this looks a little bit distorted to me as well. But anyway, let's look back at the other side towards this building. And I suspect that this imagery that we're looking at right now from above is newer than the street view imagery, I think, but it's hard to say. But anyway, this is interesting because you have the this architecture here, which is just a little bit strange to have in the middle of nowhere, and you have some flags here, you have these fences up. It's just kind of a strange setup, and then there's a fairly large crowd of people, which I was looking at them trying to figure out if they're just tourists or what the deal is. They all seem to be a little bit older folks, and they have necklaces, well, like lanyards with what appear to be ID cards or something like that. And then if we look at this, it seems like this is an access point for something going down into the vicinity of this region over here. So what exactly is going on here in this building? Don't know. And clicking around, I wasn't able to find any immediate details, but I think it's a good candidate for possibly being an archaeological site. Although I'm trying to look in here and see what we can see. If anyone is fluent in Hebrew, I could take the time to plug this in and do more research and try to figure out what this means, but I was just disinclined at the moment. But anyway, yeah, interesting area. Let's see if we can zoom in and see. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. Alright, well, anyway, what just happened there? Okay, so we're closer in. And this is a very nice little plaza area. I guess this is maybe the heart of the city of David, if it's some kind of municipality or something like that. And it looks like they're here doing work. Maybe this is some kind of ceremony. Don't know. Well, let's see if the street view will allow us to keep going. Okay, yep, more work. And work is exactly what we would expect to be seeing if there's a temple site. Now, and this is a real good question. Is this the temple building that we're looking at here? I don't know. I think that's maybe a stretch, but it is mighty interesting. It's in, I mean, we're looking in the vicinity of this stuff here. Well, let's keep poking around and see what we can determine. And occasionally I'm going to pop over and look to the parking lot site, which is over here on the left, or to the west. And you can see we're heading towards the Temple Mount site here. Well, we'll go up to the end of the street and then we'll turn back around because I'm very curious. just a fascinating city, ton of history, a lot of stuff going on. All right, so from here you can see just how much taller the so-called Temple Mount site is, but from the scriptures up there, that's the Antonia Fortress. That's the Roman engineering right there. And I do believe that that's what's going on with that. So let's see if we can figure out where this causeway was that came down into the city of David. Let's actually look at that real quick. So we're going to go out here. So when we come up to there, the causeway seems to be over here around the right, around the corner of, so we've got this wall here. This is actually very high. And then the City Mount area proper is up here. And that seems, if anything, from this to be even higher than that. So we're right here where this red pin is. We're going to go around to the right and kind of go up in here and see if this is where the causeway and stairways are. I think that is what we're going to find, but we'll see. This is interesting. I'm not tremendously familiar with Jerusalem. I mean, I've seen maps, but the maps don't really. Let's see if we can get a better angle on all this stuff. Alright, so now we've got, and it's kind of up in this corner elbow that I'm looking at to see if we can see. Can we go that way? No, apparently not. Just trying to get a good vantage. Then we can zoom in. And it's hard to say exactly how much of this was here in the time of Christ. Obviously, the city has been greatly built, enhanced, and expanded upon. And that's the mosque there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then we got the Dome of the Rock, which is the shrine part of it. And so we're down here along this road, and we're looking up at this. And I do think, so you just look at how we have this tiered construction here, and we're kind of obscured a little bit from these buses. I'm guessing if we had a better view, we would see probably that there is a stairway. Let's see if we can zoom in here. Are there stairs and stuff? Well, there are some going up a little bit. So this is actually a pretty good candidate in my view for the area where those stairs were that Paul was taken up. Let's I'm going to go down a little bit further and see if we can get a vantage where we're not stuck with all these buses in the way. Can we look between the buses here? No, that's not quite right. Alright. I think we looked from that perspective already. Okay. Let's do one more. Okay, I think this is going to give us, the nice thing is you can zoom in quite a bit. Okay, so it does look like there's sort of stairways and a series of stairways going up that give access most likely to the Temple Mount area, or the Fortress Antonia. There does appear to be stuff over around on this side, but I can't zoom in any further than this. And it's hard to say too. There may have been more. Sometimes what they would do is they would build with stone on some things lower down, and then they would build scaffolding and more wooden works on top of that. So that's not to say that there couldn't have been more stairways and access points even further back via scaffolding and wooden stairways and stuff like that. Anyway, interesting stuff. And I guess is that one of the minarets around the mosque? Let's I'm going to head back to where we were. Okay. little bit too far south. Let's go back this direction. So we're approaching. Okay, yep, so that's the Temple Mount direction there. So we are back down in here somewhere, and we're approaching this site, which is coming up on the right. And I just want to get an angle this way as well to see what we can see. I'm trying to ascertain the nature of those constructions that we're seeing over on this side. It is real interesting to me that they have all that fancy stonework in the city of David, you know, in gold there and stuff. What's going on with that? Is there a museum there? Is it some kind of state house or municipal center? Are they constructing something there and under the guise of constructing something else? I don't know. There seems to be a lot of people up in that area from the pictures here. What is going on? Alright. And like I said, I'm just giving a bare bones kind of overview of this topic and poking around a little bit, being a little bit nosy. But I don't really have anything definitive for you. I'm not going to point to a spot on the map and say this is absolutely where they're going to rebuild the third temple. But I'm just kind of giving you an idea of possibilities, what could happen, so that when it happens, you won't be surprised when, you know, they make the announcement, oh, we've actually already started on the foundations of the temple, or maybe even they intend to build it completely and not even tell the world about it, and then one day it's just going to be like overnight, oh, yeah, we've been raising these red heifers. We went ahead and we sacrificed the red heifer, we purified the priesthood, and we finished the temple, and here it is. You know, pull the tarp off. And it would not surprise me, given the geopolitical situation, if the Jewish religious leaders are doing stuff like that. Alright, well, I don't know that we're really going to be able to get too much more details from there, but let's maybe take a look at it from the backside if we can. Is that possible? Can we get up here? Yes, we can. Alright. So now we're a little bit down a hill, it looks like, from some of this stuff. Alright, so red is north. That's interesting. Not sure what that is. Interesting as well. So I wonder if this is part of a larger museum complex. That would definitely make sense given the things. We have what appears to be a little amphitheater. There's a lot of people gathered out front. So my thought is this might be the City of David type stuff, might be an archaeological site and museum more than anything. And so, you know, now we're facing north, now we're facing west, and you can kind of see we're downhill from all that stuff. Let's, I'm going to jump back up to here. So now we're back up near, that's the direction of the Temple Mount there. But if we flip it around and look south, this is that archaeological site, the parking lot archaeological site, but can't really tell what's going on there because of the privacy wall they've got up. But let's go ahead and just go this way, see what we can see. I don't know that we're really going to be able to suss out anything of interest, but let's try. Okay, let's scoot a little bit more this way and see if we can get on the edge of the bridge overlooking. Okay, so now we're overlooking the that parking lot site, and here we are. This is interesting because we have a temporary covering over that parking lot site. And then here, from here, we can see this is across the road. I believe this, whatever this is, right here. So here we've got the City of David stuff. What is that? Don't know. Then we got this right here. So this, by the way, this is in the general vicinity of what is the consensus view is the Palace of David. All right, that's where we are right now. Basically parallel with the Gihon Spring. And just to illustrate that, let me pull up Gihon Spring, Citadel, City of David. Do we have any other? Gihon Spring, Palace, across from the Gihon Springs. You get the idea. But this right here seems to be all of this right here. And then the City of David stuff, the fancy architecture, that's this. And then this goes down the hill. And there's, you know, all this stuff down here. And then we were kind of looking up the hill at all of this, unsure of exactly what we were seeing. But this is a pretty large area. And that's what we're seeing here. It's a covered up area. And this is interesting because this is really reminiscent in my mind's eye of that covered space where underneath it there's just bedrock and the original temple foundations. This very well may be where the first temple was. And then history has just kind of, to some degree, lost that knowledge and to some degree intentionally covered it up for geopolitical reasons. That, I think that might be it right there. Just from our from this particular angle, looking down at the parking lot archaeological site, that doesn't look very exciting or enticing to me. For some reason, I just have an inkling that this right here is significant. So this, just to emphasize it again, is this right here, whatever that is, whatever's going on there. If any of you have ever been to Jerusalem and have, you know, toured the City of David and have been in this area and know this stuff, and you're like, no, you're wrong, there's a food court under there or something, by all means, please share, please let me know. I'd love to get some feedback as to, you know, if I'm in the ballpark on this stuff, or if you're going to tell me, you know, oh, I've been here, and you know, there's a flower garden under those. Nothing relevant or interesting. By all means, lay it on me. You know, I can take the truth. I won't cry, I promise. And then I guess we could ask the question, could the temple have been even closer in to the Fortress Antonia? Could it have been in these districts somewhere? Which I think would be more problematic, because I think technically this stuff is still part of the Temple Mount, and, you know, it's, I don't know, I just don't feel it personally, but who knows. Alright, well, I hope you guys have found this video to be interesting. It was kind of rambling, and you know, I didn't really leave you with anything super conclusive except some thoughts and possibilities that hopefully will leave you less confounded and surprised when the man behind the curtain, you know, shows us what's coming next. All right. Well, anyway, you guys have a good one. Bye.